Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Data Risk Podcast with John Yelle. John Yelle is a luminary in the data management and data risk world, and I'm happy to announce his participation in this podcast. Hello, John. Welcome.
Hi, Sunil. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm not sure I'd call myself a luminary, but I will say that I've got lots of experience in the data space. Over 40 years in various roles. Most recently working on data risk management at DTCC. As a follow-on to a lot of the work we did in the enterprise data management space there as well.
Excellent. So maybe give me a little background on yourself, John, and how you came to be in this position.
Sure. So I again, most of my career has been been in roles around data and data management, deep technical roles, bits and byte level type roles in technology, all the way to working with data in a product management capacity, and then along with sort of the focus on data management over the years, stepped into roles to establish data management programs, establish data governance, put in operating models for data stewardship, and then that led us to a more precise focus on data risk management, as a way to continue to again make sure we care for the data assets that we all have. At the end of the day, it's I have kid with some of the newcomers to the to business over time is that don't forget what it all started as data processing. I mean, this is what many of the firms do, right? And so we can't do it without the data.
Excellent. So, John, I'm going to ask a very basic question. What is data risk?
Well, it's I guess the sort of the academic definition is similar to other risk family definitions, where it's the the potential impact of the harm or loss of value that a firm could have to deal with because of inadequate controls around data risk. Is the way I would look at it. I think it's to expand it a little bit, and look at data risk within the context of the data control environment, across the data life cycle. Again, it's back to what I half-kiddingly said a minute ago, is that it's at the end of the day, so much we do depends on that data, and so it's making sure you understand, what risk it carries as it moves through its life cycle, as it moves through various processes, and to make sure you have the right level of transparency into the controls around that risk, to make sure none of those bad things happen.
Excellent. So where does data risk fall within the overall risk taxonomy, John? Getting a little geeky here.
No, that's fine. No, it's and I got lots of opinions on this. So is that it's like I keep saying, it's foundational. So it's hard to say that it falls within a taxonomy. I think taxonomies themselves are inflexible and really don't provide the flexibility necessary in order to deal with data risk appropriately. With that said, you can't sort of rip things up and throw them away in many cases. So I would say that you have to put data risk as a level one, a member of the taxonomy, and make sure that you understand how it sort of filters through the other aspects of the taxonomy, whether it's financial risk, technology risk, and so on, because there's some aspect of data risk I think you'll find in almost all those families as well.
Awesome. That's perfect. So it's both financial, non-financial risk. It's almost like orthogonal to all the other risk types. That's the way to think about it. What are the components of data risk, John? I know everyone thinks about cybersecurity risk, but maybe extol a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, again, following on from, experience in the data management world, there's data quality risk is one component. And it's kind of taking that risk perspective around data quality, where rather than, understanding requirements for data quality around data, you look to see is what's the risk of not meeting those requirements, and then how do you understand it and measure it appropriately. A close friend to that would be, I would say, related to metadata. Especially with what's going on these days, the dependency on metadata is just going to grow. And so that if you don't do a good job about managing your metadata, similar to managing other categories of data, you may not be able to address your inadequate metadata risk, I would say, appropriately. How do you know what it is? How do you know where it comes from? How do you know what you can and can't do with any of those data assets? And so on. If you look into the other families, data loss, data privacy, data availability, recoverability, all those other components of data risk, again, that you need to connect, like you said, in an orthogonal fashion, may very well be addressed, through other parts of the taxonomy currently.
Awesome, perfect. So then, related to that, you've spent decades in financial services. You have deep experience in financial services. So why do financial institutions in particular really care about data risk? And they've been caring about it for a while now.
Yeah, it's I think you could almost look at it as an evolution or even a maturity question, right? Is that as we do more and more with data, as we continue to you address data management needs, you realize that there's, again, from an enterprise perspective, sort of this thing that's been staring us in the face in some ways around data risk. Even if it's been somewhat implied, the timing is right to start to address it in a more explicit fashion. And some of the work being done in AI as an example, I think, it shines a light on this. Where so many firms have done a good job of implementing controls to manage data, even though it might not have been data risk. Now all of a sudden you have this new potential technology coming in place that changes the game. And so how well do those controls fit into that new paradigm is a big reason that it's all of a sudden, I think, needs to be elevated. So that and again, it gets into the unstructured data space a bit too, because a lot of data management historically is focused on structured, dabbling a bit on unstructured data. When it comes to, for example, you look at a lot of the attention paid to end user computing applications over the years. What do people do in spreadsheets, right? And so the thing I always tried to illustrate is that if you sit on the data, right, and now I'll change the language a little bit. So they sit on the content, right, and understand, what is, where it comes from, what's being done with it, what people are trying to do to it, and now it allows you to sort of stretch it a bit to say, not just look at what's in your database tables, but look at what's in your PDFs, your spreadsheets, your PowerPoints, because a lot of that same content as well as other content exists there today as well. And we need to have that transparency so that we understand, implement the controls and manage that data risk appropriately.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question which you kind of answered already for me, which is, data risk has been around for a while. Why care about it today? And you really said it's AI that would drive the focus on data risk, right? It's interesting that you talk about unstructured data. One of the companies I was talking to said they were implementing a chatbot sitting on top of compensation data, genetic compensation data. And they had to stop the rollout because HR found that the chatbot was producing inconsistent content across inconsistent PDFs. So HR has to go and rewrite some of the PDFs to account for those inconsistencies. So there was poor data quality in the unstructured data. The chat exposed it.
Yep, and that, I think, not to always push the metadata agenda here, but what that implies is that you need to have a bit of metadata about that unstructured content that's in those PDFs, right?
Right.
It's, again, it's nothing new, right? The tagging of documents, and things along those lines, that's metadata. But now it gets beyond that. We actually are now peeling the document apart and getting to that content. Well, what's in there, right? Is it appropriate to, make it available to this chatbot that is meant to give, reliable information, reliable answers as well? Because you don't have the eyes on it, to be able to say, well, that doesn't make sense. Or wait a second, that's the 2019 version. I need to look at the 2025 version. Right?
Exactly. So yeah, you brought up some interesting points about data risk, where it is in the taxonomy, the importance of data risk in the context of AI, data risk and unstructured data, which is a little new sometimes for many data management professionals. What other thoughts do you want to leave with our audience? Anything we've not covered, John?
Yeah, I think again, it's my bias here is to beat the data drum, right? And so we need to think about, like I said, about metadata as a category of data equal to master data, transactional data, operational data, but the new categories of data that are being introduced as well, or even existing data that all of a sudden gets pushed to the fore, because in the AI world, if you look at the concept of residue, for example, someone enters a prompt and they get their answer, but hey, this is again, I'm aging myself, but there's stuff in logs, right? That all of a sudden is data that you need to be aware of, that you need to control. Again, it's not just always just to make sure you're addressing the risk perspective. There's the opportunity perspective as well. And so I would say that, at certain points, hopefully early on, and then at certain points along the way, you take that time to step back, look across the board of these things to understand, what all of a sudden is coming into the data control environment that you need to understand enough to determine, does it need what level of attention does it need? How do you prioritize it? Is it subject to the same control requirements as other categories of data? And it's again, another way to talk about it, I guess here, sorry I'm rambling a bit, is you over the years people talk about that shift left thinking, is that, okay, how do we get in front of this so that we can start to address it in a proactive way, instead of always coming around after the fact and having to drop something in to what already exists, or whether it be controls or other aspects of framework. So it's so look for those opportunities. It's a matter of just sort of behind the front page in your mind, have that greenfield in play, right? So that you don't get the opportunity. At least many of us probably never got the opportunity to do something in a greenfield fashion. But I need to think about how you're working towards that. Because things are not going to slow down, right? And things are just going to, again, that it could become that hornet's nest all of a sudden that you found you have to get under control. So how do you sort of, again, classic, buzzwords here, I know, but stop that bleeding so you don't go too crazy. At the same time, you're getting out in front and dealing with it proactively.
Absolutely. So it sounds like, agents are going to drive this concern around data risk. Obviously, regulations are always there. The impact on a company's reputation, that's another aspect. And then thinking about data risk holistically, not just cybersecurity, but metadata, data quality, data privacy, regulatory compliance. Excellent. So once again, thank you very much, John Yelle, former head of data risk at DTCC. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sunil. Bye.